So I before the show, you mentioned talking about some of the history behind chicken cock whiskey, and that's something that I guess both of us, but I really like to dive into like the history behind different brands and whiskeys. So chicken cock whiskey was originally established back in correct me if I'm wrong, back in 1856, and then there was a kind of a gap before rediscovery and resurrection in 2012. Can you tell us a little bit about like how that relaunch was, and if there were any like types of pressures to authenticity because grain and barrel spirits were working with such a historic and older brand?
No, great questions. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah. The trajectory from the original founding in 1856 until the fast forward of today, right? There's so much history to unpack. But, being that this was such a historic whiskey brand, in 2011 or so, our founder at Grain and Barrel Spirits, his name's Madi, he was in a museum, and that's where he discovered the brand or rediscovered the brand in a glass case. And I don't care who you are. When you pass by a bottle that says chicken cock whiskey on it, your curiosity strikes you immediately. The first time you see that name. So he did a bunch of research, and he found out that nobody owned the brand rights. It hadn't been made since about 1950. Had a lot of history to it, a high quality reputation, and thought, this is a brand that's well deserving of being resurrected. And to boot, we've got the most unique name in the whiskey industry, in my opinion. So it was a win-win all around. But no, to your point, we don't consider ourselves as, we're not just slapping a label on a barrel and calling it a day. We're the stewards of this historic whiskey brand in the 21st century, and that means a lot. So, chicken cock was known for a very long time as having a very high quality reputation as a whiskey. That faded a little bit after World War II. They started making it in more of mass production standards. And so we wanted to get back to that original intention of this being a high quality whiskey brand. So there's a lot that goes into that. It's not just emulating the same mash bills that they used to use, which we don't, unfortunately. But, it's not necessarily about that. It's about exuding that high quality reputation, paying homage to the brand in historical ways. That's, our modern bottle designs. We pull influence from the past there. But there's a lot to unpack here, and there's a lot that we do to pay homage, pay tribute, and maintain those high quality standards and the historical nature of this brand. So, again, 1856, the number one question that we get is, where the hell did you guys come up with that name? And we didn't. We can't take credit for it. The original founder was a farmer, and back in those days, in the 1830s, 1840s, there were a lot of farmers that were using their excess corn crops that they had and distilling whiskey with it. And James A. Miller, the original founder, started to make a very high quality reputation for himself with the whiskey that he was producing. So he established he gained enough venture capital from his farming and doing that to open up the proper distillery in 1856. Things were going great. They were shipping multiple, more and more barrels year after year. They get distributed, sent down the Ohio River, which would make their way to the Mississippi and then on to New Orleans, and then they get distributed nationwide. And so by 1860, this brand, had a very high quality reputation. People were searching for it, became a very highly sought after commodity. And 1860, unfortunately, that founder, James A. Miller, dies that year. And that kind of put the brand in a little bit of a jeopardy. So George G. White was a former clerk of his. He ends up maintaining the brand rights and continuing James A. Miller's legacy with the brand. And that's when we start to see the chicken cock name sort of get out there in newspaper advertisements and everything like that. We don't have one singular piece of paper that tells us this is how they came up with that name. But you transport yourself back to the mid 1800s. Number one, the term rooster existed, but it wasn't really being commonly used. The more common term to describe a male chicken was a chicken cock. So you got to put yourself in those shoes. Roosters were often, symbols of defiance and pride. And again, James Miller was a farmer. So you tie all that in together, and it makes a lot of sense why they named the brand Chicken Cock. There were brands like Old Crow that were popping up, and a lot of farmers that started those brands. And so it's no wonder why they were implementing more farm animals into brands back then. So it's just putting yourself in that place. But into the later half of the 1800s, this brand, again, they become the first brand in Bourbon County to ship their whiskey internationally. They're present at the first ever filmed heavyweight boxing match in Carson City, Nevada in 1897. There's chicken cock barrels there present that we know of. So a lot of cool stepping stones. But, the brand took a turn about 1900. It gets bought out by basically a monopoly that had formed back during that day called the Whiskey Trust. And they purchased the brand. They continued making chicken cock in Kentucky. And then Prohibition hit America. And, unfortunately, that took out many, many brands. And very few were being made during it. But chicken cock is one of those lucky brands that survived through it. It was made once as a pure Canadian rye whiskey up in Canada, packaged in this exact pint bottle right here, which, as you can see, that's exactly where we get our bottle design from in modern day, with chicken wire on the outside. And yeah, it was also made as a medicinal whiskey, right? If you wanted to produce whiskey legally and you wanted to drink it legally, you had to have permits and prescriptions. So chicken cock was owned by American Medicinal Spirits Company in America during that point, and they were making chicken cock as a bottle and bond medicinal bourbon. And this is an actual exact pint bottle right here from those days. It's actually got a little bit of whiskey left in it.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So like I said, it survived in a couple of different great ways, which helped it survive after Prohibition too. National Distillers owned it at that time, but again, a lot of different things going on in the industry at that point in time. Pretty much, they were making chicken cock as a blended whiskey with 70% neutral grain spirit and some other a couple other actual whiskeys, but quality went way down. A pint of whiskey, a pint of that chicken cock, a Canadian rye during Prohibition would have cost you $14 a pint if you wanted one. It's about $243 in today's money. By 1933, they were making it as a blended spirit, and it costs $1.06 a pint. So you can see how much the quality went down and how much the brand had gotten cheapened. So that's why it got discontinued around 1950. It lost popularity, quality went down. A lot of different variables went into that, but that's why it went in the shadows for about 61 years.